is that true to all bands?
Yeah, actually, it is centered. It is somewhat band dependent, as are the actual ionosphere layers will definitely affect propagation on your different bands. So all I can say is I would encourage you to look into it if you want to learn more about it. It's a pretty interesting phenomenon, and you can definitely take advantage of it.
Hey, Rudy, this is Craig, KL7 Hotel. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
Great. The audio is getting over the hump to Pahrump. All right. What I was going to say is that I had a really interesting gray line experience several years ago attending the Quartz Fest and down in near the Mexican border, if anybody's ever been down in Arizona for Quartz Fest. And at the end of the afternoon, right approaching sunset, Gordo, WB6NOA, was running a wrap up around the campsite. And I had my 3-watt, 10-meter walkie-talkie with a little antenna pulled out, listening in the back. And the band opened up, and I suddenly found myself working a station in Chile on an island off the coast of Chile down near Tierra del Fuego. And so Gordo was giving a little talk, and he said, all right, quit listening to me. Turn around and listen to that guy in the back with the walkie-talkie. He's working South America with a 3-watt handheld. And it lasted for probably about 3 minutes, a perfect copy around 28.4, somewhere in that range on 10 meters sideband. And then it instantly went away. And I later checked, and the sun was such that I was right at gray line there at Quartz Fest, and the station down in Chile near Tierra del Fuego was at the same situation. So it was almost like a conduit. It was carrying the 3-watt, 10-meter sideband handheld signal to and from down there.
That's exactly what it is. It's kind of like a conduit, like a duct. It's ducting all of your RF energy. It's a pretty interesting phenomenon. And when you work, it works pretty great. Okay, what else? There's got to be more comments and questions. And by the way, I won't even limit it to this TennaTalk. If you have any comments or questions that you would like to talk about or see more about, anything having to do with antennas, let me know. I'll make notes, and I'll try to help you out short-term what I can, but I will definitely make a note for future TennaTalks.
Rudy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that, like in QST, they have that Ask Dave column in there. And maybe what we could do is, if everyone knows your website, you could have an Ask Rudy thing where you accumulate a certain number of questions, and then you could do a YouTube just like Kassler does with his show.
Kassler, yep.
And then we could have a good follow-up on something like that.
Okay.
And as long as Craig is here, I got to ask him, because speaking about propagation, my old college days in Milwaukee, we used to do a lot of aurora work on 6 meters. But how do you find that when you're up in Alaska, Craig? When you have aurora conditions, does that just wipe you out, or do you work 6 meters, or what do you do during a time like that?
Oh, I do. I work 6 meters. I've got an IC 9700 right now, and I had a 910H before that. So I do enjoy 6 meters, and you can get good auroral propagation from Alaska. On the other hand, because of the diffraction and the bouncing of the signals off of the aurora at different angles, you get a lot of phase issues, very similar to what you get with knife edge diffraction off of mountains. The signals amplify each other or will cancel each other. So some modes are difficult. Voice modes on aurora can be a real problem. Slow speed CW or certain digital modes that are especially set up for aurora work much better. So it is doable from Alaska, and it's a lot of fun when it happens, but it can be frustrating too if you're trying to do it in modes that aren't compatible with the type of mixing that the signals tend to occur.
Yeah, that's when we were operating, we had a real nice 6 meter station, like a 6 element beam. And when we noticed on HF that things were sort of there was something wrong there. We'd all go up to 6 meters and we just point the antenna straight north and just bounce it off that. And you never know where it'd end up. But it was so distorted, you had to use CW. I don't know if the data modes could do anything today, but it was so distorted. But CW got through great then. But was, like you said, it was a lot of fun working Aurora.
Yeah, that was my experience too, and I agree.
Okay, great. So, one of the slides I put in the TennaTalk was about the inverse square law. And it reminded me from my physics college days about why that was, but a lot of people got that wrong or would get that wrong. And it was quite an eye-opener, and it's the secret of why we can transmit a signal and get it heard on the other side of the planet so far away, or in fact, even on the moon or other planets. So, I don't know if you all caught that, was the inverse square law, that the inverse square law applies to the power, but the signal that you're transmitting is actually volts per meter. That's the electric field. And that drops off by 1 over the distance only, not the distance squared. And because when you stick an antenna out there, you're actually capturing volts per meter, and a longer antenna, more meters, the more microvolts you're capturing, and the stronger the relative signal. So I don't know if you all noticed that or not.
No, that was an excellent presentation, Rudy. I enjoyed that. Being a novice, it makes it a whole lot easier for me to understand. So I appreciate it.
That's why we're doing that. That's exactly why we're doing this. Great. Hey, I see you joined us, Matt. Nice to see you.
There, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
All right. No, yeah, I was looking that field intensity. I was just sitting there looking here, and I jotted down notes from the presentation, and that was one of the first ones on your presentation. And then on my notes, and I went back and I got my antenna handbook here, but I think my page 1-4 must have been off of the radio handbook, and that's why I was taking a quick look here on my antenna book and trying to see if that was off of this. But no, I just, as you go through this stuff, I'm jotting down notes and then look it up in the books here and read about it. I know where you're at. You'll either be at the swap meet or you'll be at the club meeting. And if I come up with a question, then I'll pin you down and ask you.
You bet. Or you can come back here next month.
Yeah, I'll be here, barring some unforeseen circumstance.
All right.
So, Rudy, I was going to comment on the difference between the inverse square situation and the voltage being a direct relationship. That was actually pointed out in another presentation. We had a Zoom presentation by George Hamilton, who is a NASA scientist out of Huntsville, and he is in charge of setting up the construction for the Artemis program at the southern lunar pole, where there's going to be a full-time residence of astronauts in the not too distant future. And they're setting up a recreational station for amateur radio there. Now, some of this we'll talk about at the meeting, OVRAC meeting next Wednesday. But in the meantime, for a teaser or a little bit of advance, that was one of the things that he mentioned when they talked about the total signal loss round trip from an average Earth ham radio station to the lunar recreational station and back, and the fact that that the antenna situation is extremely important for that factor that you just mentioned. That it's not inverse square; it's linear because of the size of the antenna and the voltage relationship. So there you go. NASA's thinking about that right now for the hams on the moon.
Well, that's great. Thanks for that, Craig. So, yeah, this whole thing of being heard kind of derived out of my my epiphany about a month ago or so about the real difference that we can sometimes experience between an effective transmitting antenna and an effective receiving antenna on the other hand. And they don't necessarily go together. Only in the case of an ideal dipole do you have a true reciprocity situation where it's as good in a transmitter as it is a receiver and vice versa. But if you've got a mobile antenna, you can get that to transmit pretty well. But it being so short, it's not going to be very good on receive. And that's why you'll pick up a lot of noise, and your signal to noise ratio will be a lot lower there. And it also led me to go the other way and get into SDR radio, get an SDR unit, and I'm hooking it up to a separate antenna on a TR switch, and where I can then string out a much longer long wire antenna for the receive only. And I started doing some experiments, and indeed, it does really help. It really does help, especially if you have a short transmit antenna.
On certain bands, such as top band, 160 meters, it's a big difference. The transmit scenario can be completely different than, say, a long beverage terminated antenna that you're using on receive.
Exactly. All right, good.
A question about that. One more question. Like, what do you think, Rudy? Like nowadays, you see there, magnetic loops for transmitting and receiving, but sometimes I think like MFJ and some other companies just have receive only loops. And usually they have like a preamp right there at the loop itself, but just like what you were saying, sometimes having a better receiving antenna. So is that something, instead of, I can understand if you could run out a long wire, but how do you see those receiving loops? Are they really effective at all?
That's a really great question, Steve. A good example of that is a disc cone antenna. You will never see anybody transmitting on a disc cone antenna. You know what I'm talking about? It's the kind with all, it's the ones that stick out at a plane, and then you got a whole bunch of these little needles sticking downward at about a 60-degree angle. Fairly short. Generally 25 megahertz and up is what it's good for. And it's specifically for receive only. Probably the main driving factor is to make it a very broadband antenna. The only tuner you have on that antenna, of course, is your receive tuning front end. So there is no, in most of the cases, no active tuning in the antenna. Now they do have a few active antennas, and most of those are FET, low noise amplifiers, preamps, right at the antenna before it hits your coax. So that's usually what they mean by active receiving antennas. But the main distinction, Steve, is they've optimized the design and the inductance. And by the way, one of the things they'll do with an active receiving antenna is they'll have a high impedance input to the preamp, and then they'll convert the impedance to 50 ohms to a 50 ohm coax to bring it into your shack. You want a high input impedance into that preamp because you don't want to suck all the electrons away. You want to allow a very, very small voltage to build up some reasonable amount of current into that preamp to be able to get that signal and then convert it into something that's 50 ohm compatible back to your shack. Hopefully that helped.
Yeah. It's just that, if someone's looking for a quick installation, you have a whip on top of the car there like you do. I'm thinking about that, but I'm also thinking, well, would it be worth then to have one of those receive only loops? Would work better? Like noise wouldn't be an issue, like loops are all slower than noise, but in terms of a more effective receiving antenna, I wonder, would the loop be more effective than that whip on top of the car there?
Well, depending on the design of the loops, there's so many different loop designs. Many loops will have a tuning circuit, a Q, very, very high Q tuning circuit built into them, certainly on the transceiving type loops, mag loops. But to be perfectly honest, for my money, a simple piece of long wire strung out the window and thrown into a nearby tree actually is going to do better than almost anything else you've got, and it's a heck of a lot cheaper.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Cool.
Oh, I think Greg is actually showing us a very large discon antenna. Where's that one? Titan Missile Museum.
That's in Tucson, isn't it? There's a missile
Okay.
museum.
Yeah, there we are. Okay, so this is at the Titan Missile Silo at Green Valley. And there's a spike on the top of this thing. The idea is after the nuclear apocalypse that this thing is underground and a pneumatic charge will blow it through the glassified layer at the surface of the earth, and it'll pop out. And then the survivors down in the silo could see who they could reach to find out if there are any other survivors left within radio range.
Interesting. So this is a disc gun that they've actually built large enough to scale for HF. And I think I see a hoop on the bottom, and I assume those are wires coming down from the top down to the edges of the hoop.
That's correct. That's an HF disc gun, and you are welcome to use it. It is available for hams to use whenever the museum is open. The same group that runs the museum at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, the Pima Air Museum, also runs the Titan Missile Museum. So you are welcome to take your radio and hook up to their coax and operate a giant disc cone that was designed for the nuclear apocalypse.
Wow. So where is that? Is that in Tucson?
Just south of Tucson. It's in Green Valley, Arizona.
Yeah, so it's just southwest of Pima Air Museum.
That's correct. It's the same people.
Yep, I've been there. It's pretty cool. Well, great. Thanks for that, Craig. That's a great example. So that's one that's actually a transceiving antenna disc cone. I haven't seen that. But, you know, talk about big antennas. Of course, Marconi and back in those days, they didn't know about all this propagation stuff and wavelengths and everything like that. So they threw up the biggest things that they could throw up that seemed to work. So it's interesting to see. Antennas are such a cool field because there's just so many different animals in that zoo.
Yeah.
Great. What else you want to talk about, guys? We got some time. Just looking over my slides here.
Yeah, Matt's got a question. Go ahead, Matt.
Sure, Matt.
Go ahead. Yeah, kind of along the lines there of what Steve was talking about there. Why, since I'm still kind of new to this stuff, why would you run a receive-only receiver in addition to your usual transceiver? What's the advantage to that, or what are you trying to accomplish when you have basically you got your transceiver and a receiver, so you're running two receivers and then your transmitter for talking? What are you trying to accomplish by running the dual receiver, so to say?
Great question, Matt, and I can answer that because I'm going through that right now. The thing that incentivized me to do just that and get an SDR radio from SDR Play was to have a separate receiver that could give me a full spectrum scope pan adapter spread a spectrum of the entire band that I could see at once with a waterfall on a high resolution display, and synchronize those frequencies up using a USB cable and cat control command link in the computer to synchronize up the frequency. So all I have to do is I can see where the action's at. I can see the noise floor. I can see where it's noisy, where it's quieter, etc. I can pick a place to camp out and call CQ, or I can go to a cluster and see what's going on. I can zoom in, I can zoom out. It just gives you a 10,000-foot view of the entire band. And then when you do see something of interest, you literally just point and shoot. Your transceiver's already on that frequency. Maybe you want to hit tune on your transceiver once, maybe you don't have to, but you're already on frequency and you're hearing them, and then you're ready to jump in. That's why, plus the fact that I can set that up for a separate antenna that may be more optimized for receiving efficiency than maybe the compromise size transmitting antenna, like, for example, my noodle antenna.
Okay.
Yeah, but Rudy, make sure we tell people that if you're using one antenna and you've got a receiver, especially an SDR, that's receiving on that same antenna, and then you want to transmit, you've got to have some way to turn that SDR radio off when you transmit. And there's a couple of things that do that out there, because you do not want to have that feedback into your SDR, or you're going to lose yourself a little radio right there.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true, Charlie. What I use is a TR switch that's got a gas discharge isolation switch. That's very high voltage, very, very high impedance isolation between one side of the relay and the other side of the relay. So it's basically, it's a relay in glass. And so you also have to be careful if you're going to do it with a manual switch, an antenna switch. You want to make sure that it's got very little bleed through, because on transmit, some of that can bleed over and get into your SDR radio and blow the front end of it if you're not careful, if you have a really junky AB switch for an antenna switch. And if you forget, then you're really in trouble. Now, I have a TR switch that's got a cool feature on it, by the way. It's made, or at least marketed, by Banggood, and it's a TR switch, but it has on the front, it has little 3.5 millimeter jacks, so that you can put the output of either your computer listening to the SDR radio or your transceiver audio output. You can hook those two input jacks on the front, and then hook up your speaker or your headphone to the center jack, which is the output. And then whichever you're listening to in transmit or receive, like if you're transmitting, you would hear it in monitor mode if you're monitoring yourself. And in receive, you could set it up so that either both receivers are listening to the antenna, or just one or the other is operating. And but you would be hearing that live, whether you're transmitting or receiving. You'd be hearing it in your earphone or on your speaker. And that's a pretty cool feature.
Yeah, MFJ makes one for pan adapters that works with your radio, that will actually turn your pan adapter off while you're broadcasting, just because you're doing push to talk. So the PTT goes through that and does that. And of course, here's the simplest way to do it: is buy a real SDR transceiver.
Yeah, you know, that's great, except that they tend to be a little bit pricey. I think.
Yeah, they are, but they do work. And I want to tell you, because I used to use a pan adapter, and but I had it on a separate antenna, and so I didn't have to worry too much about that, as long as I didn't have them close to each other, and I didn't. One was a wire, which is logical for a pan adapter, and then the other antenna for HF. But yeah, that is true, and it works really well. And that's exactly what you're going through right now. But once you get that SDR transceiver, life changes for you. It is really amazing.
Oh yeah, they're great. I mean, Yaesu, I think they named their model numbers after the price, like the FT 3000 and 5000.
Yeah. Well, that's the same thing with you know, I mean, they're all that way.
Yeah, I guess you get what you pay for. If you really want a high end, get yourself a Flex radio or but I had one, actually. I had one of the Expert Electronics Sun SDR DX2s, and I never took it out of the wrapper because of two reasons. One, I realized that my mission for my radios had to be fieldable, easily fieldable, without dragging a whole bunch of other crap with it to make it work, like computers and monitors and all that jazz, and network, you know, switches and routers and jazz like that. I wanted something that wasn't totally homebound kind of rig, which is why I like the 991. And the other thing is that it's Russian made. And with the outbreak of the Ukrainian war, I said, not too sure about support coming out of Russia in the near term. So I sold it.
Rudy?
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, that's excuse me. That's why I suggested last week at our board of directors meeting that Charlie or someone else, I'm sure Charlie could do a good job with this, at one of our monthly meetings, just give a talk on SDR. You know, what is a software-defined radio? Because we hear that term so much, And it seems like to me, it can mean a lot of different things. You know, like I got a little SDR radio I'm going to be making as a kit, this little QRP rig. And then Charlie has this $3,000 box sitting on his desk, with an on-off switch on it that he calls a transceiver. SDR can mean so many things. And I think to a lot of us, whether we're new or been around for a while, it's still sort of a murky topic. And I think if we could have just what is SDR and a little talk about that at one of our monthly meetings, it would be a big help to a lot of us.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. And, I did that one time, I guess maybe 4 or 5 years ago when it was starting to heat up. Not too many transceivers at that time, but now it's just wide open. Since ICOM and Yaesu have opened up their big rigs to SDR, and it really has changed. I think it's going to change an awful lot of things, actually, because it is really amazing when you start seeing all that stuff up on that waterfall.
Well, it's not just the user interface and all the new features and functions that it gives you, which can be pretty intimidating at first. But when you start looking into the underpinning architecture, it's pretty interesting, Steve. All the digital processing that they're doing there and understanding, for example, I learned about just what is this IQ signal coming out of SDR radios, and what's it for, and how do you deal with this, and how do you what is it all about, right? Is a whole area to kind of get a better handle on, to really appreciate why the digital modes in particular work really well, because of all the digital processing you can do to extract those really weak signals, extract data out of those very, very weak signals because of the digital encoding that is done, and then you decode it on the other end. Now, there's the other cool thing is they have a thing called GNU radio, which is the ultimate software-defined radio, because it's literally, you can build with building blocks, but with drag and drop and then configure building blocks, you can build yourself a live SDR radio on your PC.
Yep.
It's got enough PC power to it, and you know what you're doing. If you're kind of a real geek into it, you can actually do that. That's pretty cool. The other cool thing about it is that so many of the rigs are becoming all firmware driven. For example, my Xiegu 6100, I just downloaded an entire new image, and you boot this up with the little micro SD card with that image on it, and the 6100 is a completely new machine. It has a complete new user interface with new features. It's amazing.
Yep. That's exactly right. Once you learn what Q is, that it's amazing what you can learn from that. But yeah, you're right, Rudy. It is. But I enjoy it because actually, the filters and everything actually can change based on the software that you have in it. And you can actually, if you want to get into it, you can actually create your own filters by creating programs that would be able to work in your system. I know Flex has a program where if you want to be a developer, you can work with them, and they will help you develop your filters and everything that you want for the bands that you're going to be in. But there are so many out there right now, and most of the radios come with them already there, and they have built them in such a way from the algorithms that they actually work way outside of the band that you may need them for. So you have almost an unlimited ability to narrow down all that noise and pull in very, very weak signals. It's just absolutely amazing.
And it's particularly useful in some of these digital modes and slow scan TV and weather facts.
Digital mode is basically built in to an SDR radio. All you have to do is just make the software work in your computer, and that's it.
And it's a complete open tool chest now.
Yep.
And I think you're going to see pretty much all transceivers and receivers move in that direction, because you can upgrade the firmware, so you can teach the dog new fixed, and you can modify it, change it around, change the user interfaces. It really brings a whole new breathes new life into radio architecture. It's really cool, and I plan on actually doing a kind of a technical intro to SDR as part of a TennaTalk later on in this series, actually. And I won't get into too much detail. I'll give you kind of an overview of what's going on. So if it whets your appetite, there'll be plenty of ways to dig deeper, but at least you'll have a good idea of what it's about and how you might want to get involved.
Yeah, that's good. The only thing is right now I got an old Hallicrafters transmitter and receiver. They're staring at me right in the face with a real dirty look on them. I wonder why.
Well, at least you can keep your shack warm with those.
Yeah, right. My hands warm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
I
So
get a
Rudy,
kick
why
out
don't
of
you?
this.
Yeah, I'm
No,
sorry.
sorry, Charlie. Sorry, Charlie. I go back to the tuna can. Anyway.
Yeah, that's true, man.
Anyway, I hear this over and over, and it's not that I'm anti-computers, but it really throws an interesting slant to everything we do nowadays for hobbies. And it's like I'm also into model airplanes, and computers have taken over the radio transmitters on those to where guys are buying planes that are made in sweatshops in China, and they spend all day programming a transmitter. I do off-roading, Jeeps, and on my dual sport bike. And guys are literally, I've seen people with 2 and 3 tablets stuck on their dash of their 4-wheel drive vehicle. And they got an extra mount there for their cell phone too. And they're running topo maps, real-time topo maps on this stuff, you know, GPS downloading it or satellite downloading it, you know, and it's just, where does this going to end? And it kind of brings me to the question, I'll throw it out here right now, not, you know, kind of a rhetorical question. How many of you would still be into ham radio if there was no computerization of it? You know, it's kind of one thing. Look, I've got a vacuum tube. Y'all remember those things?
Oh, that's a heater. That's a good heater.
Your SDR radios, and you still just had to hook up to an antenna and you talked to someone, or you did, of course, the traditional way of CW. You know, it's like the computerization of things. There's a lot of people that are into hobbies nowadays because of the computerization of it. I've seen it in aviation too, with the advent of the composite aircraft and the digital displays in the cockpit, to where all you have is 2 or 3 big screens. You know, gone are the days of all the little round gauges, you know, and it just really throws an interesting quirk or, you know, twist into everything of this whole computerization, you know, and it's just like, wow, where's this going to end? You know, and like you're saying with the SDR, one more quick, you know, and it's like when I first started getting into ham radio and they talked about SDR radio, and you bought, literally, it looked like a thumb drive, and you just plugged it into the USB port and you turned your laptop into an SDR. You didn't need to buy a transmitter or anything. You know, it's like your laptop became the radio, and it's like, wow. You know,
I don't see the place to plug in the SD card in this one.
Yeah, that looks good to me.
Well,
I know, I had one. That's a Hallicrafters SX.
Yeah, Hallicrafter.
110.
I could go along with that. I've got an SX99 Hallicrafters up on a shelf here, and I've also got a Yaesu FT101 sitting up there.
Wow.
Oh, there's a 51. Yeah.
And the Yaesu FT101, I suspect when it came out in the 70s, it wasn't $101, Rudy. It was probably a little more than that.
Well, $101 back then was still a lot of money. But to your point, Matt, you know, the way I look at it is this. I can see your point that it could really maybe drag you off into the weeds. But at the same time, I think the great thing about ham radio is there's more and more every day for more people. There's more little corners, little niches to explore, and little bits to put together that you never thought you could fit together. Suddenly they got new pieces to play with, and now they fit together. So, and then I look at it all coming back. Eventually, you know, it comes out and it spreads out into digital modes and into all kinds of other kinds of software and everything like that. But at the end of the day, there's always the heart of ham radio, I think, and represented by field day. And that is field preparedness for disaster communication. And I think that's the heart, and that's always the anchor that we can always come back to. We should never forget about that as a key mission for ham operators and being prepared for that. And that's why being able to put up a quick antenna and knowing how to put up an antenna that'll actually work and get out, that knowledge can be critical.
Yeah.
Yep. That's a very good point, Rudy, because that's basically what it is now. Because, you know, when the cell towers go down, which they have in California during fires, you are left with nothing except maybe a ham radio operator somewhere that can assist in communications. And we all know what that is. And
we found that out in Paradise, California, and the fire.
Absolutely. Yep, that's an exquisite example of it.
It is,
because the towers all went down in that. And that'll happen almost anywhere, even in hurricanes. I mean, you know, take a look at, you know, Florida. A lot of hams live in Florida because they are the last resort. And
so I think no matter what you do, I think it's great to explore all these other things, but at the same time, I think it's always very prudent to have a low-tech fundamental core or backup to whatever you do. Always have a low-tech backup. You know, recently I looked into EMP proofing. So I'll share with you a little bit of something I learned the other day. And that's how the cheapest, simplest, fastest way to EMP proof your electronics, whether it's your laptop or your rig or your hard drive that you've got all your family photos on or whatever. And that is, you take, let's say it's your rig, you take it and you wrap it in stretch wrap, which you can get big rolls of at the moving store, okay? You wrap it in stretch wrap to protect it and insulate it, okay? You wrap it real well. Then you wrap that in two clamshell layers of heavy-duty tin foil, and then you close the edges real tight, and then you tape those over all the edges and anything that, all the corners, anything that might tear, you tape it over with aluminum tape that's found in your duct aisle at the local hardware store where they do the ducting, duct they have aluminum tape that's conductive. And then you wrap that again in your stretch wrap to protect the tin foil from getting damaged and to insulate the tin foil by one layer. Then, if you want to, you can put it into one of the small galvanized trash cans with a lid and put some aluminum foil tape around the edge of that to double insulate it. But in reality, from all the testing that I've seen, just doing what I said without putting it in the tin or the garbage can will already protect you from all but a direct overhead exposure to EMP burst.
Yeah, well, so you do this in advance, or do you know? I mean, how do you know an EMT burst is coming, Rudy?
I like to use my $1,200 radio in the meantime. Thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly.
So what I do, I literally have it sitting there next to the rig. Okay, I have a go box that I can put that I've got all the accessories and space for it with foam cutouts for the rig and everything. I've got the go box there, and I've got my EMP kit right next to it. And so, I mean, if you're going to have a direct EMP attack over your head,
I don't think you have to worry about anything because your brain will be scrambled.
You got bigger problems.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, I think there's a fairly decent chance you're going to have some kind of warning, like threats from North Korea or Iran or whoever. You'll hear threats, you'll hear escalation, you'll hear some little incidences happening, and they'll start to escalate. And this might take a day or two. Well, I don't need a day or two. I need 5 minutes, all right, to get home, wrap up all my critical electronics. That might take me a half hour to an hour, but I'll just wrap them all up and sit on them for the next day and see if things cool down and this problem blows over. Or if not, then I'm think I'm.
I'm going to start calling you the super prepper, Rudy.
Oh, please. Don't call me a prepper. That's a different group of people. But hey, we're all preppers in a sense because
Oh, yeah.
we believe in the mission of being prepared. I mean, I'm a Boy Scout, right? But we believe in the mission of being prepared for emergency communication. I think that's close to every one of our hearts.
Well, we're getting close to the end here on our time, Rudy. You want to tell them about what your next podcast is going to be?
You betcha. The next podcast is going to be about getting efficient. I'm looking forward to this one because now we get into the meat. Now we get into the dig down into the down and dirty and gritty of impedance matching and balance and ununs and chokes and all of that stuff and trade-offs. And we start getting into it. I'll have a separate one later on just on tuners and impedance matching that'll go into Smith charts. You'll learn about Smith charts, but that's in the future. But the next one is getting efficient. And that's designed to actually dovetail into the upcoming antenna shootout in April. And right behind that in May, the antenna tune-up clinic to help people really get an understanding of how to get the most out of their antenna to be ready for this coming field day.
Excellent. That's very good, Rudy. So are there any further questions? Not seeing any further questions. So everybody, thank you very much for coming. And let me just get my little screen going here. So let's put that thing up there. And we've done that. And so the next pass, getting efficient. That's what we're talking about. So everybody, we will see you next month, and make sure you go up to YouTube and catch the third podcast from Rudy. And we'll be talking about that and get your questions all ready for the first Monday of April. So thank you very much. And 73, everybody, we will see you at the next general meeting, if not before. Take care. Thank you, Rudy.
Yeah,
Thank you, Rudy.
Bye.
Thanks, Charlie, for hosting.
You bet. Take care.
Get rid of this damn.
Hey, Charlie, you still there?
Yes, I am.
Great. Okay, I'm going to put some handouts together for the satellite passes, and also I'll have a slideshow. So I'll send that all to you ahead of time so that it's not a last minute thing, and you'll be all set. Is that okay?
Very good. Excellent. Very good. And I like that idea of giving us a little bit of snippet of what's going to happen up on the moon. I did not know about that. That sounds pretty good.
That's actually a separate program, but a Zoom show that George Hamilton would be happy to do for you. So I will give his information to you if you would like to have him do a full show about ham radio on the moon and how they're going to build structures out of lunar concrete made out of regolith and sulfur. It's pretty cool.
Okay, excellent. Very good. Thank you very much, Craig. And
we'll see you Wednesday.
I'll go ahead and shut her down now.